She hadn't expected this job to be anything other than a paycheck, a simple massage, a cold, distant man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. But the moment her fingers touched his scarred back, something shifted. He flinched, a deep, painful flinch that shook him to his core. In that instant, she realized he wasn't as cold as he seemed, and that realization would change everything. Why did he react this way? What was hidden beneath the hard exterior he'd built around himself? Could it be that the billionaire, whose name alone could make anyone quake, wasn't the monster everyone thought he was? Stay with us, because what happens next will reveal the truth about the man behind the scars, and how the one thing he's been running from might be the very thing that heals him. She never thought she'd be working for someone like him, a billionaire with a reputation so cold, it could freeze anyone who dared get too close. His name, Mark Holden, was enough to send a ripple through any room, and his business empire was just as unforgiving. But she needed the job. Anna had her own struggles, living paycheck to paycheck, trying to escape the shadows of her past. This job, it was her chance to make a living, a fresh start. When she walked into his mansion that first day, she knew it wasn't going to be easy. The grand, empty halls, the silence that seemed to swallow everything, it all screamed of isolation. Mark barely even acknowledged her presence when she entered. His eyes, dark, intense, never met hers. He had walls so high, she couldn't even imagine what could break through them. She was just there to do her job, massage his shoulders, maybe help with the stress that came from being a self-made billionaire. But that was before she touched him. The moment her fingers brushed against his back, she felt it. The tension, the weight of something more than just muscle and bone. She felt the jagged edge of his scars, the rawness of a past so painful it haunted him. And when he flinched, a sharp, involuntary reaction that she hadn't anticipated, she saw it. Beneath that cold exterior, there was something more, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. Anna wasn't sure why it mattered to her. But in that brief moment, she realized he wasn't just the untouchable man everyone made him out to be. He was broken, hurting in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. And it was clear that his past wasn't something he could easily escape. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was something deeper. She couldn't walk away now. Something inside her, something she hadn't even known existed, drew her closer to him. And despite her better judgment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was going to be the one who helped him face the ghosts of his past. But was she ready to confront her own? 5 years ago, Anna hadn't known what it felt like to be truly seen. She had been just another face in the crowd, working tirelessly to survive, to keep her dreams alive in a world that barely acknowledged her existence. But then, she met him. It was at a charity gala, a sea of elegance and power, where the rich and influential gathered like royalty. Mark Holden stood out, of course. He was taller than most, his sharp suit fitting perfectly, his dark eyes scanning the room with a detached calmness. He wasn't interested in mingling with the crowd, but his presence demanded attention. Anna had been there, working as a waitress, barely able to hide her discomfort in a room full of people who spoke a language of wealth and influence she couldn't understand. But then their eyes met, and for the briefest of moments, something unspoken passed between them. His gaze lingered on her, not as the help, not as someone beneath him, but as someone with a story. He made her feel seen. She remembered the way he had approached her later that evening, a subtle smile tugging at his lips as he complimented her on the grace with which she served. His words were soft, almost quiet, as if he was choosing them carefully. They spoke for only a few moments, but it was enough. She felt a pull, a connection that was too intense to ignore. And so began their secret, unspoken romance. They would meet when no one else was around, brief encounters in the quiet of late nights, fleeting moments where nothing else mattered. She hadn't known much about his life, only that he was a man of power, someone who could change the world with a word. And he hadn't known much about hers, only that she had a quiet strength, a resilience that spoke louder than anything else. But that wasn't enough to keep them together. One evening, just as the cherry blossoms bloomed in the spring air, Mark had been different. His eyes had held a sadness, a storm swirling in them that she couldn't understand. He held her hand beneath the pink petals, his fingers gently squeezing, whispering promises of forever. She believed him, believed in the dream he painted with his words, but forever shattered the moment she found the letter. No explanation, no goodbye, just words that left her breathless. "I can't be with you, Anna. It's better this way." The letter had cut deeper than anything she could have imagined. It was a clean break, one that she hadn't seen coming, leaving nothing but the remnants of a love that had never truly had a chance. Years passed, and time seemed to erase him from her life. But the scar of that moment, of the way he had disappeared, lingered in her heart. She had moved on, or at least she tried. Yet deep down, she couldn't forget the way he had once looked at her, the way his touch had felt. She hadn't understood it then, but now, as she stood in his mansion, massaging the back of the man who had once stolen her heart, she realized he was running from something so powerful, it had destroyed them both. Now, as she touched the scarred remnants of his back, the truth she had denied for so long came rushing back. He hadn't just left her. He had been running from himself, from a pain that was too heavy to carry alone. And as she looked at him now, sitting silently in front of her, she couldn't help but wonder if the man before her, the cold, distant billionaire, was the same man she had once shared a dream with. Could she ever get that back? Or was it already too late? As Anna massaged Mark's tense shoulders, her fingers trembling slightly with every touch, the weight of the past felt heavier than ever. She knew something had changed in the man sitting before her, but she couldn't understand it. The scars on his back told a story she couldn't quite grasp, but they were only a fraction of the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. Mark was no longer the man who had whispered promises under the cherry blossoms. The pain in his eyes now was colder, deeper. The walls around him had grown higher, impossible to climb. The more she learned about him, the more she realized how much he'd buried. But despite everything, something about him still drew her in. She couldn't deny it. She'd thought that time would erase her feelings for him, but seeing him now, so close, so real, it was as if the years had never passed. His presence made her heart race, even as she felt the distance between them widen with each passing moment. Was it the man she still loved, or the idea of him that kept pulling her in? And Mark? He couldn't escape the truth that she had walked back into his life. He had made sure of it, keeping her at arm's length, not allowing himself to let down the walls that protected him from feeling anything. But the moment her hands touched him, the heat of her touch ignited something inside of him. Old emotions resurfaced, emotions he'd spent years trying to bury. The flinch, the one he couldn't control. He had tried to hide it, but she'd seen it, and that terrified him. In the past, he'd walked away because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. He had to keep his distance, had to remain the cold, untouchable man. He wasn't just the heir to a vast fortune. He was bound by expectations, family, legacy, duty. He couldn't afford weakness, couldn't afford the mess that love brought. But with Anna, it was different. She didn't care about the power he wielded or the name he carried. She saw him. She saw the man behind the mask. Yet the fear that had driven him away years ago still held him captive. If he let her in again, could he protect her from the darkness that loomed over him? His scars weren't just physical. They were reminders of the choices he had made, of the sacrifices he'd had to endure. He had spent so many years convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, that he could survive on his own. But now, with Anna back in his life, everything felt fragile. He had to make a choice that could tear them both apart or bring them back together. But he wasn't sure he was ready for that. Was he strong enough to fight for what he wanted? Or would he walk away again, choosing his empire over the one person who had always believed in him? Across the room, Anna watched him, her heart aching as she saw the indecision flicker in his eyes. She had always believed that love could conquer anything, that it could heal wounds, erase scars. But now she wasn't sure. Was she strong enough to face the truth about him? Could she truly help him heal, or would she only end up being hurt again? Both of them stood at a crossroads. The weight of their past hung between them, a reminder of what had been and what could never be. They were no longer the young, hopeful lovers they had once been. Time had changed them, but could it bring them back together? Or would their fears, their pasts, and their broken hearts keep them apart forever? As Mark watched her, his chest tightened. The memories of their love, of the way they used to laugh, the way she had held him when the world seemed to crumble around them, felt like a dream he was terrified to wake up from. But that dream seemed impossible now, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had already lost her. The silence stretched between them, heavy and full of unspoken words. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but they both knew one thing for sure. They couldn't keep living in the past. Something had to change. Something had to give. The storm had come suddenly, the rain pounding against the windows like the world itself was about to shatter. Anna stood by the window, staring out into the chaos of the night, her heart tangled in a mess of confusion and hurt. She had never imagined she would find herself here again, not with him, not after everything. Mark was behind her, silent, as he always was when the storm inside him raged. She could feel the weight of his presence like a physical thing, but the distance between them had never felt wider. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke them both. Neither of them had spoken in what felt like hours, but the words were building, waiting for the right moment. Finally, Anna couldn't take it anymore. She turned to face him, her breath catching in her chest. She had to know. She couldn't keep living in this limbo. "Tell me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you never loved me, and I will walk away. I will leave and never look back. But if you don't, if you tell me the truth, everything changes. Everything." Mark's eyes flickered, the cold facade slipping for a split second before the wall came back up. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening in a struggle to hold it all in. His heart was racing, every instinct in him screaming to protect himself from the rawness of this moment, to shield his soul from the pain that had never truly left. He could lie. He could tell her that it was nothing, that it was all in the past. He could walk away, let her go, and protect himself from the vulnerability that she threatened to bring. But even as the words formed on his tongue, he knew they would burn both of them. "Mark," Anna's voice broke through the storm, fragile yet demanding. "Don't lie to me. Don't tell me you didn't love me, because I know you did. I know you still do." Her eyes were filled with desperation, but also with a strength that he hadn't seen in her before. I can't lose you again." His voice cracked, a sound so raw it almost shattered her heart. For a moment, he seemed like the man she had once loved, open, vulnerable, and willing to risk it all. But the fear was still there, lingering in the dark corners of his eyes. He took a step towards her, but stopped, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to close the distance. "I didn't want to hurt you, Anna. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I could walk away and it would be easier. But it hasn't been easier. It's been hell." She could see the pain in his eyes, the battle inside him. He wanted to reach out, to beg her to stay, but the ghosts of their past held him back. The guilt, the self-doubt, the pressure of the life he had created, the empire that demanded so much of him. It had all built a wall around him that not even love seemed capable of breaking. And yet, here she was. He had pushed her away once, but she was standing before him now, waiting for him to make the decision that would change everything. "I know you're scared," she said, her voice softening, her eyes searching his. "But if you walk away now, I will never forgive you. Because I loved you. I still love you, Mark. And if that's not enough for you, then maybe we should let go." The rain fell harder now, the sound drowning out everything else, but the silence between them was deafening. He could feel the weight of the choice before him. Walk away, protect himself, and lose her forever, or take the risk, tear down the walls, and face the past with her by his side. The words were there, sitting on the edge of his tongue, begging to be set free. But the fear was still so strong, the memories of their painful separation too fresh. Anna. He breathed her name, the weight of it breaking him. He finally took a step forward, this time closing the distance between them. His hand reached for hers, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Please don't walk away from me." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She knew he was afraid. She knew the depth of the scars that marked him, not just physically, but emotionally. But she also knew that love didn't work like that. It wasn't about perfection. It was about healing. "Mark," she whispered back, tears welling up in her eyes, "I never left you. You walked away from me, but I never left you." Their fingers brushed, a spark igniting between them, and in that moment, everything they had buried, the pain, the longing, the heartache, came rushing to the surface. It was raw, it was terrifying, but it was real. He leaned forward, and as their lips met, she felt the truth settle between them. The past could never be erased, but maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to build something new, something stronger, something worth fighting for. But as the rain poured outside, neither of them knew if the storm inside their hearts would ever truly subside. The storm had finally begun to fade, the rain easing into a light drizzle as the tension between Mark and Anna simmered into something quieter, something still uncertain. They sat together on the couch, the space between them no longer so vast, but there was still a quiet hesitation in the air. Their hearts, though closer than ever, had yet to fully trust the words they had spoken, or the feelings they had finally acknowledged. Mark looked at Anna, his hand resting gently on hers, but his mind was still clouded with doubt. He had spent so long convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, that the weight of his past, of all the mistakes and losses, would always be too heavy for anyone to carry alongside him. But now, here she was, sitting beside him, not asking him to forget, but to remember, to move forward. "I don't know how to make up for everything I've done," he confessed, his voice low. "I hurt you. I walked away from the one person who loved me unconditionally. I don't deserve a second chance." Anna met his gaze, her eyes soft but firm. "You've made mistakes, Mark. We both have. But love isn't about perfection. It's about learning, about being willing to try again, even when it's hard. And we've both had our share of hard." His chest tightened as he heard the truth in her words. He wanted to believe them, wanted to believe that they could still find their way back to each other after everything. But the fear that had lived inside him for so long, the fear that he would only bring pain into her life, hadn't fully left. Anna squeezed his hand, her voice quieter now, but no less certain. "Maybe it's not about finding the way back, Mark. Maybe it's about building a new way forward, together." There was a long pause, and in that silence, Mark realized something he hadn't let himself admit before. He was ready. Ready to face the future, no matter how uncertain, no matter how many obstacles lay ahead. Ready to let go of the past and build something new with Anna. The fear would always be there, but so would she. And that was enough. "I'm scared," he whispered, his thumb gently brushing her hand. "But I don't want to be without you anymore." Anna smiled softly, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, that spoke of all the things she had carried in her heart for so long. "Then we'll take it one step at a time, and we'll be okay." For the first time in years, Mark believed her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Anna by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. As the rain outside began to taper off, the world around them seemed quieter, calmer. But in the stillness, there was something undeniable. Hope. A hope that, despite everything they had been through, they were finally ready to move forward together. Mark leaned in, his lips brushing her forehead, a soft promise in the touch. Anna closed her eyes, letting herself believe in it, the possibility of a love reborn, of a future not defined by fear but by the courage to try again. As the last of the storm faded into the night, they both knew that while their past would always be a part of them, it no longer had to define their future. The rest of their story had yet to be written, but for the first time in a long time, they were ready to write it together. Is love strong enough to heal the deepest wounds? Can two people, torn apart by time and fear, find their way back to each other? Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought within ourselves, between holding on to the past and embracing a future we thought we could never have. What would you do if love knocked at your door again, this time with a second chance? Would you open it or would you let it slip away? Love isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for.